In this presentation, we want to look at the first draft of putting your presentation together. We're looking at injecting some of your personal stories to illustrate what's going on, what you're trying to illustrate. Because your personal stories have never been heard before, it connects you to the audience. They want to find out about you as well as the information. But you are the primary thing that they're interested in, your take on this idea. Normally we will start off with a mind map. So you have your title in the centre, and you just put down everything you can possibly think of. We need a massive mind map of information. You're not trying to map the speech out at this point of view, here. You're just trying to get as much information up there. If it's crazy ideas, put it in. It'll get your juices, your creative juices flowing. So create a big mind map. Do it electronically, or do it on a whiteboard, or do it on paper, whatever. But if you think of an artist, when he goes to do a masterpiece, he doesn't say, oh, I need that colour, that colour, and that colour. He gets a palette with a massive colours on it. And most of those colours will end up going down the drain, but he will create more and more colours. You need the palette. If you look at a sculptor, he starts with a big block of stone. Most of it's chipped away. And then he ends up getting the grain right and the sculpture just perfect. So that you've got to have this palette to work from. And the other thing, what it does for you, when you have this huge amount of information, you realise there's 10 or a dozen speeches in that information. It really makes you zero in on the important parts of your presentation. And then you're really going to look at that information and say, what do I want them to remember when they switch off the video or they walk out the door at the event? At the most, they'll remember 3 things in a 12 or a 15-minute talk. For every point that you make, you've got to have at least 2 bits of evidence, 2 bits of thing to back it up. It might be a visual, it might be a case study. You need one story, preferably a personal story, because that becomes the hook. They remember the story and they remember the message because of the story. And if you think of any of the great motivational speakers that you've ever been to, it is always the stories that you'll remember about them. It is important that your stories are not predictable. You need to mix them up. Start a story, go into something else. Come back to it later. When you reward somebody, they get a hit of dopamine. So if you tell them a fact and tell them what it does, they think, oh, that's good, they get a hit of dopamine. But if you tell them to start, and then you have them waiting in anticipation, that dopamine multiplies and multiplies and multiplies. So you can be looking at 4 or 5 times the injection of dopamine. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter. It helps your concentration, it motivates you, it helps you learn, and it holds your attention. That is why you really look at mixing your story out. Don't make it predictable. The other thing is laughter. Produces endorphins, another neurotransmitter. With your neurotransmitter, they are ready to learn immediately. And it's a great way of connecting with the audience. So always look at that. Don't worry at the start, but as you start to get structure into your presentation, look at how you can mix it up. Whenever you give an important point, make sure you pause. people don't remember what you tell them, they remember how you made them feel. So it's always the emotional connection, and to have an emotional connection, they must have clear air. And that pause will be as long as, boy, David, I never thought of it like that. I better use pauses. That is the length of your pause. Big pauses. If you want people to remember, make sure you put in big pauses. If you've got any opportunity for dialogue, dialogue's a great way to get emotion into a presentation. I was talking to the professor and he said, David, you've got to do this. And I looked at him and I thought, no way am I going to do that. Just use your head either side to have the different characters, a slight difference in your voice. But it's something that you can really get emotion across. If there's anything in your presentation which there is a crisis that when you were developing your idea, or while it was happening, really look at bringing that crisis into the front of your story. It's what you call a Hollywood opening. If you watch CSI, what happens? The movie starts, bodies everywhere, the team marches in. Then the baddie gets away and he starts killing other people or causing more problems. So they ramp up the crisis. You know, if you go to Jaws or Little Red Riding Hood or The Three Pigs, it's all the same. They use the crisis. Now, a crisis doesn't have to be dramatic like that. A crisis is just something that changes the way of a person's being. So really look at if you've got any crisis in your presentation, make sure you consider putting it towards the front. So once you start to get going with the information, you use a speech mind map. You'll have an opening, your points, you might be 1, 2 or 3. You're going to need about 5 minutes to get people to remember. You've got to hit it, as we've said, about 3 times to really get them to remember. So it's always less is more, less is more. Don't try and put a whole lot of information in. Really have those, they want to walk out or switch that video off and have your message just ringing in their ears. With your visuals, make sure they're clear. Ideally no text. If there's text, make it large font, very clear, very uncluttered. Use 2 or 3 slides if you've got to put more information in. Don't clutter the slides. Your visuals should have impact. And remember, you as the presenter is the one who's going to win the audience over, not the visuals. And don't have too many, perhaps 1 a minute, just whatever works out. And make sure every visual must have a release with it. If it is not your own photo, if it has got any people in it, if it's of a newspaper, or if it's anything that is other people's materials, you must have a signed release. And it must be to the convener probably 3 weeks before the event. And we've had people bowl up the day before with a new slide deck, and we've just chucked it in the bin. It just doesn't, there was no releases. We cannot use it. Write your first draft out. You're looking at 120, I say 100 to 120 words a minute in your practice. When you actually speak, you'll probably go a bit faster. But if you've got humour, any humour in it, you've got to let them laugh. You can't walk over your laugh, so it'll be around the 100 words a minute. But you're talking to an international audience. A lot of them, English will be a second language, so you've got to speak slower than you'd normally present. You've got to allow people to miss a few words and to be able to catch up. So always practice at being a little bit slower, and you'll find that the difference between your written word and your speaking word is quite different too. So look at making sure you're using nice short sentences and trying to get a bit of a flow. So when you have the draft finished, you should be 100% happy with that draft. So if you put it together with mind maps, you should have done most of the juggling before you've actually written it out and spent a lot of time with it. So that way you can get to this stage fairly quickly and you can analyse a huge amount of information.